Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Wilhelms, and I'm the Executive Director of Anderson Ranch, and thank you for being here today. It's the last program of our 2018 summer season, and I think it's been a great one. What do you say? Yeah. Before I introduce our speaker, Robert Longo, I'd like to thank our team and its sponsors. So I'd like to thank our board chair, Dave Fuente, and our chair of our Art and Artist Advisory Group, Sue Hostetler. They're both in the front. I'd also like to thank Ashley Tate, our deputy director, who coordinates these talks and logistics. She's assisted by Molly O'Leary, program and events coordinator. And running our AV all summer long to produce these talks, as well as videos that go on our website, are Sean Muckian and Patrick Badalian. Here's to those guys as well. So, many staff and interns work to make these lectures a success, and thank you all for your appreciation for all of them. I'd also like to thank our presenting sponsor for the summer series, Toby Devin Lewis, and our National Council supporters and sponsors, as well as our corporate sponsors, Douglas Elliman Real Estate, our premier sponsor, and Christie's Cultured Magazine and the Weston Snowmass. So thank you all for your support. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about Robert Longo. Robert is a painter and a sculptor. He was born in Brooklyn in 1953, and he grew up in Long Island, New York. He graduated from high school in 1970, and that was the same year as the Kent State University shootings in Ohio, which started as a student protest against the U.S. invasion of Cambodia and led to nationwide uprisings. Robert knew one of the students who was killed that day at Kent State, and that event crystallized in him a dedication to political activism, which carries through in works from then through today. Robert became a rising star in the 1980s for his Men in the Cities series, which depicted sharply dressed men and women writhing in contorted emotion. In a conversation this week, Robert said to me that after 40 years as an artist, the greatest challenge is to stay relevant. Well, the reason that Robert is here with us today is that after 40 years, his work is now more relevant than ever. I am pleased to introduce and share with you Robert Longo.
Thank you. Okay, here we go. I want to thank you all for having me here. I always feel a bit out of place. I don't quite have the right attire for Anderson or Anderson. I feel like I came dressed for Brooklyn, not for... But I'm very impressed with what this place looks like. So what I'm going to try to do is, I was a bit nervous about doing this. I don't really like doing talks so much because I feel like I'm trying to tell you my whole story. I even made notes, which I never do, which is kind of amazing. So I want to point out the fact that, first of all, I'm going to start a timer here so I don't go stupid. Okay. Art is my religion, basically. That's what I believe in. I'm a great scholar of art history. I'm increasingly more aware of the fact that the art history that I admire so much is basically all white men, but I'm trying very hard to expand my knowledge for sure. Also, being a white man is something that I'm very aware of, that I'm kind of like, my strain has kind of been responsible for really fucking up the world greatly. So anyway, please forgive my profanity. It's basically my lack of vocabulary. I was dyslexic growing up, so I didn't have a really hard time reading. As Nancy pointed out, I basically my life at high school was rock and roll, sports, and girls, and then Kent State happened, and it kind of changed my life. I was the football player with long hair who wore 00, but at the same time, the whole thing, how I became an artist is that I was dyslexic, I couldn't really read, I looked at pictures a lot, newspapers, I was raised on television, magazines, newspapers. I mean, I came of age during the end of the kind of the American dream, I think. My father always had Cadillacs, used Cadillacs, that was really important to him. But Vietnam, civil rights, Muhammad Ali, Kent State, things like that were really shaped who I was. I went to school, I got into like a school, North Texas State was the only school accepting it, to play football. I tried to major in, I thought I loved surfing, I thought I could major in biology. I quickly dropped out of that, and then I thought, well, I should major in art, and I flunked out of school. I was thrown out of school. I ended up finally finding my way to not having the courage to be an artist, so I decided to learn how to do restorations of painting. So I got scholarship to go to Europe to study restorations of painting, and after seeing so much old art, I realized there's enough of it, I want to make my own art. So I decided on the steps of a temple in Agrigento in Sicily, I decided to become an artist, which was like a very pressing moment for me, for sure. I remember that very clearly. As an artist, when I say 40 years, I kind of say 1977 is when the picture show first happened. I don't know if you know the show, but it's this seminal show that happened. And I became an artist during the age of Reagan. And Reagan, if we don't remember, he was like the guy who first said, "Make America Great Again." And he was talking about things like traditional values. I'm going, in America, what exactly is traditional values? Like, a couple 100 years ago, we owned slaves. Is that traditional American values? And what was interesting about Reagan becoming president, it was like all of a sudden a line was drawn in the street, and you had to take a side. After following someone like Carter, who was kind of like a moral free-for-all, I wasn't quite sure his hair was over his ears, and he wore blue jeans. I wasn't quite sure where he was. Reagan, I took a real clear position where I was. And my work from that point on has always had a degree of a political edge to it. I think that there is a moral imperative that I deal with every day as an artist, that I think it's really important that I have to know what's going on in the world. I think all artists should do that. As to how that manifests in your work, that's your choice. But I think it's really important to do that. I think artists are reporters of the time that we live in. I mean, if you look at a Caravaggio painting, you see the dirty feet of the peasants, you get a nice sense of, or Rembrandt, you get the sense of the time that people live in. I think it's really important. The other thing is I want to preface thing is that I think all art is political. It's because it's about the freedom of expression. And during Reagan's time, I actually became aware of the fact that maybe there would come a time when I would be told I couldn't do what I did. And now, more so than ever, I'm afraid of that. And what's happening in Europe, I did these 2 drawings based upon Charlie Hebdo and this other attempted assassination of this Danish cartoonist, that people actually are trying to kill artists. So I'm very aware that what the great privilege I have about being an artist, and I try to take that opportunity and really use it. Anyway, so what we're going to do is, I've always been concerned with images and images of pictures of pictures. I think it's really interesting because I think this phantom empire of images that exists out in the world, we're inundated by thousands of images. And what's the recourse of those images? What I've tried to do, I think in my body of work, is slow images down. And what's interesting, in the last 15 or so, 20 years, I focused on these charcoal drawings. And ironically, what people know, they know Men in Cities, and they don't know this. I've been, like I said, a lot of artists. That's why I'm going to show you this barrage. And I'm trying to concentrate a little bit on the most recent work. But the thing is, I'm trying to slow these images down, and ironically, I use this incredibly archaic medium of charcoal. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Cave of Forgotten Dreams, where they discovered all these charcoal drawings in France. And they're like 30,000 years old. I go, that's my ancestry. So, like, I'm a fucking caveman. So anyway, so what we're going to do is, my art, I started in Buffalo. I went to school in Buffalo for art. I started an alternative space. I started living with Cindy Sherman at the time, and we drove to New York in that minibus. That was my minivan. I was also a hippie for a while, too. So this is me in 1974 or 75. Okay, so now we're going to start the barrage. Okay, now I'm done. Now I'm going to sit down and tell you a story. So I think for me, actually, talking is a way of trying to... It's interesting, I said this before, as an artist, you know, I have to do a lot of interviews, which is really great. You tend to have to repeat a lot of the same stuff over and over again. So how do I tell you the same things that I've said over and over again and make them sound like I'm just thinking of them that moment? So I want to let you know that this is cathartic for me, for sure. So what happened when Ferguson happened, I was completely freaked out by the response to the protesters. And at that time, the militaristic cops of the United States, I thought when I first saw this photograph in the newspaper, I went, must be the Ukraine, or this must be like, you know. And then I realized it was in Ferguson, in the United States, and it completely freaked me out. And so I started, every time I do a different series, I get quite involved in the work and do research, the whole idea of how cops end up having all this militaristic equipment. So I bought the rights from some photographs of journalistic photographs, and I made this composite image of these cops. And this drawing actually is in the Broad collection in Los Angeles. And I wanted to put you on the street so that you were actually on the street, you were protesters. And I mean, I find it quite, the way the cops look, really, it's really cool. I have this little pointer, but they're so frightening to me, the way they look. But what's great was when I saw this picture, I realized off in the distance, there's McDonald's. There's an Exxon over here. So this is the United States that we live in. So around that time, what has become what I call the destroyer cycle, because I think the response of the Congress to Obama and now to this current president is a very trying time for me in America, and I think I've categorically called this the destroyer cycle. This was a drawing that I made with the frustration about the way the Congress was working, the Senate and the House of Representatives. This is like, also I was reading Moby Dick, which I don't know if anyone read, I've read it over and over again. It's basically the genetic code of America. I mean, Melville put 36 people on the crew, which was the amount of states that were in the Union at the time. Anyway, so this is the Great White Whale, or the Temple of Doom. The way I drew it with, I went to the Capitol many times. I learned everything about the Capitol, and I drew it in a way, you can't really see it from this photograph, where, I don't know if you know what a dolly zoom is, where the foreground stays the same, but the background changes the size. So this has this look that if you stand in front of it, the sky looks like it's kind of moving. It's kind of hard to see in this, but also it kind of fades off in these ends here. It looks like it's on a hill, and there's a city off in the distance. But what was really funny about it is the drawing was quite large, but you could actually look in the windows. I'm sorry, you can look in the windows. Go back. Where's the pointer? You can look in these windows. Anyway, you could be like King Kong. And looking, I was able to do some of the windows, and it was like, also what's interesting is one side of the Kong, I found that when the flag is flying, it means that that body of government is in session. So if here, the flag is flying in the Senate, but it's not flying in the House of Representatives, because that's where I think all the idiots are, but anyway. Anyway. That's an aside, but anyway, this idea about what the American dream was, I did this body of work of abstract expressionists. I did a two-part show where the Capitol was in one gallery, and the other gallery was a body of work that was basically black and white, highly sensitized translation from color of abstract expressionists. Because I thought, this is Joan Mitchell. I talked to a woman here who's very inspired by Joan Mitchell. This is what I was talking about. What was great about this painting is that she couldn't really reach the top. The painting is all in the guts, and it's quite amazing. It's like a knife fight. Anyway, I grew up seeing only black and white photographs of ABEX people, and I was really interested in analyzing abstract expressionism because there was a lot of abstract art, young artists making work at the time, and I became kind of freaked out by it because it seemed like it was very anti-political, highly process-oriented, and I thought, and at the same time, it was also Romney was running for president, and I thought, fuck, if he becomes president, this is going to be the art for the next 20 years. And it really bothered me. So I thought I should go to the original source where the first really great American art happened, which was, to me, is abstract expressionism. So I really dove into it. I did all this research with these guys, and I became really quite fascinated by it. And I could go on about that, but there's a whole other story. Anyway, the first official show that was called the Destroyer Cycle was the show that happened, I guess, 2 years ago at Metro Pictures. And when I started, as an artist, I grew up with my heroes were like Sarah and Nauman and Smithson and things like that, guys that were breaking the rules of art. And here I am, on one hand, I started thinking that the more traditional I can be, the more radical and I can be. How do I control things? By making pictures, controlling all the ideas I have and forcing them into a frame became a really interesting thing. At the same time, the idea of installation art always is part of me. So whenever I do an exhibition, I build a model of the space. I take an enormous amount of time to figure out where the work goes. I mean, the exhibitions are totally like placed as a meaning of vehicle. So when you first walked into the gallery, you saw this drawing. So what I did is I contacted the Capitol. I got a high-res image of the Constitution, and so I decided to draw the First Amendment because there seemed to be 17 states at the time deciding about outlawing political protests, which seemed to be what. And everybody's always talking about the Second Amendment, but the First Amendment is the right of freedom of expression, religion, and the right to protest. And I thought it was really important. I went so far as to find out who the guy was who actually wrote the first, whose handwriting it was. I got really obsessed about it. So it was really interesting. I made this charcoal drawing of the First Amendment. Inside the exhibition was basically, I don't know if you know Rodin's Burghers of Calais, but I realized that Rodin was a huge influence on me. And this exhibition, in a weird way, the subtext of it is the Burghers of Calais, because it's kind of a lot of groups of characters. So these are all charcoal drawings. The thing about the charcoal drawings for me is that I try to use, each drawing has a different strategy. The white is always the white of the paper, so what you're dealing with is I'm doing something that's opposite of traditional painting, which is traditional painting, you work from dark to light, and like the last thing you do are white highlights. So this was based off of a photograph I got of a telephoto infrared photograph from a newspaper of prisoners being loaded onto a plane in Kandahar to be taken to like some black site to basically kind of be tortured. And this picture haunted me for years. And I couldn't figure out how to do it, but then I realized if I looked at a lot of Seurat drawings, which I thought was really, so this drawing is thousands and thousands and thousands of little marks. But if you see it, you can see they're connected with these like plastic strips around the wrists. It's like, these are the Americans, this guy here and that guy there. They're quite ominous. And their headdress, you can tell, they're quite, do you know the Burghers of Calais? The English had surrounded Calais for like a couple of years, and they basically said, look, give us your 5 most prominent citizens, we'll execute them, and it'll be all over. And that statue of these 5 guys just looking so horrible, like they know they're going to die. Actually, the English never executed them, but so these are more cops. I became quite interested in cops again. These are the riot cops from Baltimore, which are quite ominous, and this drawing is actually very rough. What's interesting, I've tried to establish with the drawings a kind of a distance around 4 feet where you think they're kind of hyper-real, but then when you get really close, it deteriorates to basically highly abstract marks. See, I think representational art is abstract art. It's just, you have like, I think if there's a spectrum, you have traditional representation over here and you have modernist abstraction over here. I think I exist somewhere in the middle. Or maybe what I do is translate photographs or something like that. Because the thing is that we all remember our memories, we remember stuff like pictures. You know, there was a guy that I knew who always was sad. He was divorced and he would go visit his kid, and he would always take pictures of his kid. He wouldn't play with his kid, hang out with the kid. He would go home and then he would look at pictures of his kid. It was and the idea, our memory, we tend to remember in photographs. So what I'm trying to do is access photographs. our way that we think. I even try to evoke the photographic grain in these drawings because I use a certain kind of paper that I've used it for 30 years. And so I'm trying to trick you to think that there maybe are photographs. What's always great is I always wonder who these people are when they come into a gallery and they look at my work and they go, oh, photographs, and they leave. I wonder what kind of lives they actually have. You know? This is a statue in Iraq that was one of those statues that were destroyed by the ISIS. I was a parent, and I had to watch these crazy animals for a while. And I needed to throw, this exhibition had the prisoners, it had the cops, it had the sculpture, it had football players, it all was very heavy. I needed a curveball. And at the same time, the curveball was probably the most prescient of them all because it is about the media. And if you look really closely at this, I got this off the internet, and I kept a highly deteriorated image. I actually tried to draw all the pixels and stuff like that. And I found this, also I took obviously taking all the color out. I mean, I work in black and white because I think, my youngest son asked me one time, why do you work in black and white? And I started thinking about it. And I started thinking, maybe I think black and white is the truth because I grew up with Life magazine. And in Life magazine, the cover would be the picture of the circus or something like that, and you turn the page and there would be a color spread of Marilyn Monroe, or color spread of the flowers and the rose garden in the White House. Then, boom, the black and white photographs of Vietnam or the horrors of Calcutta. And somehow I started thinking that black and white maybe is truth to me. So, but I also think that black and white is highly abstract. So in that sense. But there are also a group of characters. So this. When I made the Ferguson drawing, also the other thing I have to preface, I've taken to this practice that whenever I do clearly overtly political work that I can identify groups that protest or are involved in some political action involved in, I try to, the 20% of the work usually goes to that organization. So 20% of this drawing went to like the law firm, legal fees for protesters in Ferguson, the NAACP, things like that. So what I was trying to do when I did the drawing of the cops, I was trying to do the protesters in response, but I could not do them justice. It sounds really terrible, but all my studies looked like they were doing the Macarena. I could not do this. But then, as coming from the football tribe, this amazing thing happened during a football game where I don't know if you know football, but the wide receivers on the football team are the most crazy fuckers on the team. They decided to come out with their hands up when they were being introduced, which was quite amazing. And within this picture, the guy who organized it is that guy, Kenny Britt. And you can see that he's real determined, but he's looking to make sure all these other guys are doing what they should be doing. And this guy looks like, oh, I'm in trouble. This guy's the tight end. He'll do whatever you say because he's the big one. And these are the two, like fire plugs. They're really excited about it, but they know they're in trouble. The only thing I really changed on this, they usually have these banners that have pictures of retired athletes and stuff. What I did is I put Bank of America back here. And ironically, the audience is mostly white people eating burgers and stuff like that. And if you look really closely, I'm over here. A couple of my friends are in the background too. But this drawing was really important to me. I grew up, again, in the Vietnam time, and one of the images that really blew me away was John Carlos and Tommy Brown with their fists up. And to me, this image is as powerful as that. So this is the picture that it was in the back room. It's 12 feet tall by 28 feet long. The other thing is, so here I am making these highly aggressive images on paper with charcoal. So they're incredibly fragile. They're dust. There's a kind of weird dichotomy that exists with it, a contradiction that goes on. So this drawing, I wanted you to feel like you were in the boat or you were actually in the water with these people. So what this are Syrian refugees. I contacted one of the organizations I support is Doctors Without Borders, and I saw this photograph. So what I did, I got the rights for the boat, from a photographer named Will Rose. And the ocean is actually a photograph from, I used to surf a lot, the ocean, the water in the front of my house on Fire Island. So it's this kind of composite image. But the vastness of this and these small people in this boat, it was so moving to me. The most exciting part of this drawing to me is this right here. There's this sunlight that's here. Somehow this weirdly has hope to me. I don't know what it is. But again, these are all drawings done in charcoal, so it's like, this is all very sculptural. And I'm also limited by the size of my paper, so sometimes I have to stick paper together. See, there's a seam there. So this is a show I did in London last year, and what was interesting to do a show in London and realize that the United States is London 2.0, British Empire 2.0. So all this work was kind of loaded with political stuff. This was anyway, that headdress is from the Osage tribe. Do you know this tribe? That they discovered oil on their reservation, and they became some of the most wealthiest people in the United States. And then slowly they started marrying the white people, and the white people started killing them off. And the FBI got formed, and J. Edgar Hoover, the first case that he ever tried was against one of the murderers of the wife, the husband of one of the wives. Anyway, this was the flag drawing was actually on the cover of the Daily News when Trump got elected, which I thought was kind of interesting. Let's see. So this is the room in the back. The drawings are incredibly heavy. They're like between 500 and 600 pounds because they had to get framed behind plexiglass and stuff. So I became very fascinated with X-rays because X-rays in a weird way are a lot like my drawings. The white is the white of the paper. It's kind of like the way you see X-ray. So this is Manet's Folie Bergère painting, and I became incredibly fascinated with this painting because when I saw that, and also it was interesting, I started to meet all these conservators, and conservators never get to meet living artists. They just really opened the book up for me. I would go visit them in the Louvre, and they had this wall, this light box, and they would have 20 or 30 X-rays to show me. And it was an incredible experience to see these people that basically save history. So I became fascinated with all these X-rays, and what was amazing about this X-ray was she has 2 sets of eyes, and her arms were originally crossed in front of her. And when what the final painting is that she has this look like what the fuck do you want? As opposed to being this very demure, the difference is her eyes were down and now they're directly in front. So I found this really fascinating, this picture. Then the other thing that was really bizarre is over here, you see that beer bottle with the red triangle on it? I'm going like, what is beer doing at the Folie Bergère where they have all these champagne bottles, right? It turns out that, what's the name of it? Bass Beer was the first beer company to get the copyright for a logo, which is that red triangle. And what they did is at Folie Bergère, a lot of English guys were coming to the Folie Bergère to sleep with these women, but they didn't drink champagne, they drank beer. Some more cops. So these trees are interesting, right? About 5 years ago, I had a stroke. And right before I had the stroke, I was going for these walks in Prospect Park and taking photographs of trees. I became very friendly with my brain surgeon. And I said, so you actually drove into my brain and zapped my blood clot and stuff like that? And he says, yeah. I said, can I see pictures of it? So he showed me pictures of my brain, and I went, this looks a lot like trees. So what I've been doing with trees is I've been fusing images of my own brain with images of trees. So this is actually not a real tree. This is like a combination of my brain and a real tree. The other image this is a missile strike in Syria, a drone strike in Syria, a Russian drone strike in Syria, which I thought was on a city, but it actually was a vineyard, and where they. So I'm going, why are they blowing up food sources? And then I decided I did a whole series on icebergs, which is really interesting. Is how do you draw white with black? It's kind of a weird particular. So I think these are highly abstract. And the other drawing over there, this is the front window of a grocery store in Copenhagen when they tried to shoot the cartoonist, and they couldn't get him, so they went to the nearest Jewish deli. But it ends up to me looking like a lot like an abstract expressionist painting with numbers, or like with a little bit of Jasper John thrown in. Oh, I'll keep moving faster. This is the X-ray of a Bacon painting, which is really interesting. It's an anti-war painting, but I won't go into it. So I decided anti-war stuff. What's the most important anti-war painting in the 20th century? It seemed like it was Guernica. So I did all this research on Guernica, and I got permission from the Picasso Foundation to do it. And what they told me was I could make it, but they said is you could do it, but you can't be the exact same size. So this is actually 6 inches smaller than the real one. But I also thought that we know this painting so well, and I read so much about this painting. I mean, I know all these really weird stories about this painting, but what's interesting is Picasso the last thing he painted was a door over here. That's where he kind of leaves the painting by. And there are all these weird scenarios that happened within this painting. It was done very fast, and it happened after the bombing of Guernica. I guess you guys all know the story. That what was interesting is that they were originally going to bomb, what's the other big city in the northern part of Spain? Bilbao. They didn't want to bomb Bilbao, but the Germans, Franco asked the Germans to help him. So the Germans got all really excited that they can use their new, not shock and awe, it was the same kind of terminology, but they could use it, they could experiment their new technique for warfare. So they bombed the shit out of Guernica with traditional bombs, and then they dropped fire bombs onto it. So it was absolute carnage. So I thought we've seen this so many times, but how do we really see it? So I at the same time was seeing all this stuff about information that was being redacted by the government. So what I decided to do is redact it. So I decided blocking out parts of it to make you see parts that you never really looked at. And having you, what's interesting is that Eisenstein, this was influenced by Eisenstein, the filmmaker. You know the scene in Eisenstein, the woman with the broken glasses holding the dead baby? There's all sorts of amazing things in it. But what's interesting is this was shown in Paris, it was shown in Germany. It went to a show in the Wexner Center in Ohio, and kapow. Disgruntled guard came in, fortunately the day that the museum was closed, and he proceeded to shoot a bunch of art. And my thing got shot 3 times. This is the back of it. And then he proceeded to shoot himself in front of my drawing, which is like, but he had pretty good taste in art. He shot a polka. He shot a Warhol. So I thought it was some good company. But so when they did this, immediately restorers were asking me like, "Well, we have to fix this drawing. Well, what should we do?" And I said, "No, leave it. It's part of Providence of Peace." Now it's very funny. I told you the story about the basketball. I was recently in Milwaukee, and I saw one of my really early drawings at Men and Cities, and I realized in the corner of the drawing, there was used to have a basketball hoop in my studio. I used to play basketball a lot. And I realized in the corner of the drawing, there was a little mark of a pigskin and the W of Wilson from the basketball accidentally hitting the drawing. And I asked the conservator, could I, while I'm here, let's open it up, I can erase it. And she said, "No, you can't do it, it's part of the work now." I said, "It's just a fucking basketball." Anyway, so this is now provenance of my piece. It's like the bullet holes. It's always strange to watch people looking at the piece and all of a sudden they see these holes in the piece. So this is the show in Paris. This is a drawing of the front door of Charlie Hebdo. So do you all know the story of Charlie Hebdo, the cartoon? So terrorists went to this office and proceeded with really heavy-duty cannons. I mean, it wasn't like, Glocks and stuff like that. These are double plate glass windows, and they proceeded to kill a lot of people in the office. I thought this image, I'm a great fan of Géricault's Raft and Medusa, and the idea of how do you make art from disasters. And I found this image incredibly beautiful. So I got the rights for the photograph. I kind of amped it up a little bit to look a bit like a a Medusa, like a jellyfish, like a Medusa, because I kept on thinking of it. But the story that's amazing about this is that about 6 or 8 months after I made this drawing, the last thing that I drew in this drawing was the black hole here. I got this book in the mail from a young man who sent me this sketchbook, and this young man worked at Charlie Hebdo, but he overslept that morning. And I get choked up telling the story. Fuck. Anyway, he told me, he told me that my drawing helped him deal with his shit. Fuck. Sorry, this drawing always gets me, sorry. I'm not going to put it anymore in my lectures. Sorry. Anyway, it really blew me away that because he said, I know that you've spent months on this drawing, that you spent months on this drawing. And I looked at this drawing endlessly, and this book that I had was so personal that he drew my drawing backwards. He drew it from the whole out, and it was really quite intense. And the thing is, this was people attacking artists. It completely freaked me out. But I also think it's incredibly beautiful. So these are more icebergs. I thought I went to Iceberg Alley to see icebergs. What's interesting about this iceberg is that you can see how old it is because the top has melted and is raised up from the bottom. So originally it started there, and it kind of like a ship that when it gets lighter. So this is an exhibition that happened it was in a garage in Russia, then it went to the Brooklyn Museum, and it went to Deichtorhallen, now it's going to Mexico. This was like when the curator, Kate Fowle, came to me with this idea. I was like, we've talked I've known her for many years, and she knows that these are artists that had great influence on me, and she said she wanted to do a show. But I didn't quite know how I quite fit in with these two giants. Like what do I do? Do I run the projectors, or do I clean the glass on their, so she said, no. She said, you're all artists that are responding to the times that they live in. And it was really quite a great honor to do it. And I know a great deal about both these artists for sure. And so we're trying to figure out how to do the show. So she kind of sucked me into trying to figure out to do the show. And I realized that the one common thing is that we all worked in black and white. Eisenstein's films were in black and white. Goya's etchings were I have to say that to get Goya's paintings are impossible. It's like they're national treasures. But in Russia, when we were in Russia, we tried to get a painting from the Pushkin Museum that they owned. So we went to a meeting in Russia to meet the director of the museum on the day the museum was closed. And we went there and we said we'd like to borrow the Goya painting that we saw downstairs, this little small Goya painting. And she got really freaked out. She says, we don't own a Goya painting. I said, what do you mean you don't? So Kate's assistant takes out her phone and says, yes, you do. Here it is. She says, no, we don't. She storms out of the office. And the assistant director proceeds, apologizes to us. She says, yes, we do have a Goya painting, but we don't want anybody to know that we have it. Because they stole it from the Nazis, and the Nazis took it from a Jewish family, and that Jewish family wants it back. So you know the whole conflict that goes on with Russia with lending work. They won't lend the work to the United States because they're afraid they're not going to get it back. So we ended up using only etchings from Goya and from the 4th series. And the Eisenstein films, how do we show Eisenstein's films? So what we did is I came up with this idea that we'd slow them down to 1%, so one frame like every 6 seconds, and we put them next to each other. And it was quite extraordinary to see them like that. Because Eisenstein created a theory of montage and stuff like that. And this is the show in Brooklyn Museum. This is Mecca. This is part of a series called God Machines, which is really pretty bizarre. This is quite big. This is a show in Hamburg. That's an X-ray drawing of Jesus by Rembrandt. I've been doing robots too. Oh, so this is a backstory. This is 1993. My son went to play basketball without me at the cages in West 4th Street, and there was a fight, and a kid pulled a gun out, and I got completely freaked out. he came home, my son came home telling me about it, and he was so excited about it that it really kind of freaked me out. Then I realized my son started telling me when we walked down the street who he thought the kid was that had the gun. And so I started doing research with the FBI about guns and yada yada. I'd made these drawings of guns, but I don't know how it came about, but I had the statistics of the gun violence of that year in 1993 was 18,984. So I decided to make this kind of wacky disco ball. So what this is 18,934. 38 caliber full metal jacket bullets. And it was about 3 feet in diameter. What's interesting about this piece is that we used that theory hair on the golf ball to do this, and they were all, back then you could buy blanks in New York State. So we bought all these blanks and we glued them on. So, but what's interesting is you could see how when we stopped working that day, there are patterns started to emerge. At first I really hated the patterns. I thought, but realized it gives it more organic quality. But anyway, I kept on getting haunted by the fact that, so we never sold this piece. I gave it to this museum in Buffalo. And I always wanted to do a new one because the gun violence in the United States has gotten totally out of fucking control. And so I did some research about gun violence in the United States, and I decided now I have the money to do it. So I decided I'm going to make a new one. So how do you deal with the abstraction of the amount of this stuff that's going on? With all the research, I tried to figure out how many bullets do I need this time. So what I calculated out is that I needed 40,000. Through all these different websites, things like that. But the average bullet now is not a 38. The 38 is about that big. This ball is 7 feet in diameter. It weighs 2 tons. And it's made with AR-15 bullets, like the Bushmasters, which is actually, the 38 is about that big. The AR-15 is about this big. This is 38 caliber. The AR-15 is actually 31 calibers, but it has like more than twice as much gunpowder, so it's incredibly powerful. So what we did is I worked with this fabricators in Brooklyn, and they had this young guy who worked for the Defense Department, things like that, and I said I don't want a pattern because gun violence doesn't have a pattern. So what he did is he worked really diligently to create not a pattern. What he did, he created an algorithm where the closest the bullet that could be or the most it could be. So he created thousands of small patterns from 3 to 5 bullets. So it's hard to kind of see the pattern. And the core of it is cast aluminum. So now what I'm going to do is, can we do the next one? What time we got? Right, so then we'll stop now. And what we'll do while we're at... What? Okay, well, this is just to give you a little context about the political stuff that goes on in my work. This is 1986. This was affectionately called Rambo Child, and this is a bronze sculpture of, I don't know if you know the Picasso piece made with orangutan where we use children's heads. So this is made out of real objects and stuff like that. And it's bronze, but actually this is the second version of it that the Whitney owns. And they put it up on the roof the day of the inauguration, which is really kind of great. So it's real, on one hand it's a kind of self-portrait, on the other hand it's this really overtly macho kind of monster. This is my joint show with Castelli and Metro, and this is Corporate Wars, which is, I don't know, there was a young man that we were talking about the Battle of Centaurs. This is modeled after Michelangelo's Battle of the Centaurs. My studios used to be down by Wall Street, so I would go sometimes get high and watch the people in Wall Street. But this is again 1983. This is Beirut. Oops, sorry. And this is a sculpture of a guy that looks like Men in the Cities, except he's wearing sports clothes, which is like what most of the people in Beirut were wearing. But I wanted to take him out of the picture and put him in your living room, basically, in that sense. This is a retrospective at LA County in 1989. This is a piece that this Tate in London owns. These are the series of combines that people seem to not remember about my work. This is a piece because it was a response to most of the women that I know who were making work at the time. The work was far more severe and aggressive than most of the men. And most of the men were like the bullshit, the neo-expressionist stuff that was going on. It was painting, decorative. So this is basically a church steeple crushed down on itself. This is actually a drawing of 3 different guys put together underneath yellow glass. And this is a 3/4 inch slab of aluminum it's basically a sword. This is like the handle, this is the sheet, whatever you call it, and this is the blade. But this is an abandoned missile silo in Nebraska, where I thought it seemed great. It says inert on it. Again, another political piece. This is like bad education, like the war. Anyway, they all have narratives too. But again, these different materials. This is marble, wood, aluminum painting. This is the American Civil War with baseball bats. You know that baseball was invented around the time of the American Civil War. What's interesting about sports and America is that after the American Civil War, sports exploded because in the United States, most of the men were playing sports. And they needed to have that camaraderie. If there is a camaraderie that exists in sports and in the military where guys bond with each other, their brotherhood stuff. So guys needed to play sports. So this is actually, you can't really see it, but it's a very famous photograph from Fredericksburg of these dead soldiers in trenches. And this is enough bats for 2 teams. This is a piece that's in the LA County Museum. It's called Black Planet. I mean, I love Eva Hess' work. And one of my dear friends, if you know Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zan Dance Company, and Arnie, I was very close with them. And Arnie had just passed away of AIDS, and I was so freaked out. When he died, he had all these hoses stuck in him and stuff like that. And this is called Black Planet. This is actually a back of a tanker truck that we just burnt and paint. So they hang it in the LA County usually on the days when they have the AIDS awareness day, where they hang it a few days before, and that day they turn the lights off on it. These are black flags from 1988. They're bronze black flags where you can see the color of the flags in them. And then this history of my flag work. This is to me like the underwear falling down. So this is the Pequod. It's kind of like sinking into the floor. And flags, how they keep on going. It's the most recent flag, kind of like ripped off like a poster. This is all Trumpeloy stuff. And this is my studio. So I've been doing a lot of refugee work, and these are refugees in Serbia waiting to get into the United States. And this photograph in particular, I did very little to alter it. It's a really great photographer, so I credit him in the drawing as well. The camouflage is insane. What they were doing was 124 degrees that day, so they decided to put it underneath nets to cool them off. But they're all waiting. There's something incredibly desperate. But what was bizarre about this drawing is that the closer I looked at it, you can't see it here, but there's a Louis Vuitton bag over here. And this is a Chanel bag over here. And this is a Burberry bag. And there's like a Nike logo over here, an Adidas hat over here, and a Air Jordan hat over here. I mean, it was really interesting to see their dreams manifested in their products. And also this woman here, I think, must be pregnant the way her husband holds her and so like that. And there's these children that are here, these really young children. I mean, anyway, so this drawing was sold. 20% of this drawing went to a different kind of refugee organization. But I love that it's all camouflaged. So this is another refugee one. These are actually Libyan. So this photograph I saw in the New York Times where you can barely see the boat they're on. And this is another piece of water that I found. But the thing is, how do you make these... I find these people so heroic that they would leave behind everything they have with the hope for a better life and go in the water. I mean, this is like insane. And I wanted to give them some kind of like, some kind of elevate them some point. This is my studio again. This is a combination. Do you remember when there was a thing in Hawaii when they thought there was a missile coming? I thought this was really great. So this is one of my funny drawings. And this is work that's happened where I should be right now. This drawing here is the Charlottesville riot, the Charlottesville white supremacist march with all the tiki torches. It was around the statue of Robert E. Lee, and after that happened, they covered it. So this is the Robert Lee statue they covered. But I found out recently that one of the reasons why I made it is I found that they had taken the cover off of it. So I decided to cover it forever. I think this moment in American history of taking down Confederate monuments is so incredibly important. You can see it over here. This is a study for a big piece that I'm going to make for Miami Basel. It's the taking down of Nathan Bedford Forrest statue in Nashville. He's the guy who created the Ku Klux Klan. And what they did is that the state government wasn't willing to allow people to take it down, so the city council sold the property to a nonprofit group, and they came in at night to take it down. But it's really weird, you can't see it, but the crane, it looks like a lynching, because it's at night, there's these cranes in it. If you could see these white lines and cranes, that's the statue right there. So this is another bullet hole. I'm fine. This one reminds me of William Blake's Ancient Days where God's reaching down. Anyway, so it's more my studio. So this is a really interesting to draw a plastic bag, as everyone in any basic art school has to do it. But you can kind of see there's this head. That's the head of it. This is the tail. It reminds me a lot of Abu Ghraib, the prisoners who had had the heads wrapped up in plastic and stuff. So this is the next show that I'm doing. So if you're in Berlin, come see Everything Falls Apart. The end. So what we're going to do, while you ask questions, can you throw that video on? While we ask questions, you can watch this video. This is some B-roll from the making of the bullet ball and stuff like that, so you can see. So hit me with questions. Go ahead, because I have to catch a plane. Because I have to go back to work. Some of us have jobs, you know. Can't hang out here in the mountains all the time.
Robert, I have two things. First of all, for all those who would like more of Robert Longo, I have two films. Okay, one is called The Artist Profile at artistprofilearchive.com, and the password is Longo123, and I'll put it in my newsletter, so you got it. And the other is that Robert will have a film of him on our Inside My Studio series as well, and that'll end up on the Anderson Ranch website. So, quick question. You showed us your studio, Robert, and we talked about students on scholarship, or the students who work with you, where you take incredibly great care of them. Could you just share a little bit about your philosophy of how you do that? Because I know that there are students here who are interested in where to find a really good first job.
Well, I don't teach. I teach in my studio, so the guys that work for me are on scholarship, and I pay them basically. And I teach them how to be artists, which is nobody really taught me how to do that. I think it's really important that they learn how to deal with geek dealers, how to deal with shipping, how to deal with presentation of their work, how to even talk about their work. I mean, I think it's really, so I teach them how to be artists. I don't teach them how to make art. I don't think I can do that. I think that's a highly subjective thing. And the guys that all work for me they work the most 4 days a week. Some work 2-3 days a week. I mean, I pay them really, really well. They're involved in profit sharing in the studio, health insurance, things like that. So I have a really great studio, and they're all really great artists, but there are so many fucking artists out in the world, and they've made me really aware of it, how difficult it is to be an artist right now. But yeah, I mean, I think the guys that work for me, a lot of them are from RISD, which seems to have a really great not the graduate program, the regular program is really great. I ironically got the guys from RISD because I had dinner with Koons, which I never really do, but I had a dinner with him one night, and we were talking about I needed some new assistants. I said, who else better to ask but Koons? He said, RISD has the best ones. And I was invited to do a talk at RISD, and I said at the end of the talk, anybody wants to come work, and the next day I had 4 guys working for me. So and I have 5 of them working for me for now. So anyway, yeah.
I remember buying your work from Metro Pictures and then being with you at Pat Lannon's when he took a bunch of collectors and artists down to his estate. And I asked you, how did you get those people to look so frightened? And I don't know if everyone here knows that. Robert took them on the top of a roof and used to throw pillows at them.
Actually, tennis balls.
Tennis balls, okay, I thought it was pillows. But anyway, I thought that was amazing because they all have that shocked look. The other thing is, I think you're an artistic Barbra Streisand because before she comes on the stage, she absolutely has a fear fit. And you didn't want to speak, and this is probably the best lecture I've ever heard.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
In the form of questions.
Yes.
You took our hearts and soul away with your lecture. You took our hearts and soul away with your lecture, so thank you for that. Are you considering doing anything regarding the immigrant situation in Texas and Florida?
But I just started to look at the Florida stuff. I just started to look at that. I mean, like I said, this is a moral imperative thing. I mean, I can't pay attention to everything. I'm really interested in the fires. That's the other thing right now that's going on. I mean, what's really weird is I think making art really... So some of us here remember the old radios where you would tune in a radio station. So if you go too far one way, you'd lose it. I think making art for me is a balance between something that's highly personal and socially relevant. And the European thing is personal to me because I have an apartment in Berlin and I'm in Europe a lot, so I see it a lot. I don't see it as much as I see it here in the United States. But at the same time, I should pay attention to it for sure. So thank you for your work. One more? Fabulous, I can get to the airport.
Thank you, Robert.